Sanctions or no sanctions? An unprecedented division at the United Nations is seen as a diplomatic victory by Iran. Iran's president seemingly mocking the recent US defeats at the Security Council.
Today we can say the US policy of maximum political and legal pressure against the Iranian nation has turned into maximum isolation for the United States.
But if the US stops Iranian vessels to enforce sanctions, this was a warning from Iran.
If the US wants to use Resolution 1929 to inspect Iranian ships, based on international laws, it is considered piracy and will be dealt with. And the United States will be held responsible for the consequences.
And it's here any response would likely be carried out. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, with 20% of the world's oil passing through. US warships and warplanes are based in the region, in an already tense environment.
Records that were just revealed show that for years, banks around the world have helped divert and conceal criminal funds. Now, documents leaked from the U.S. Treasury Department appear to show how banks helped to circumvent international sanctions, including against Iran and Syria. Danish and British banks, as well as Germany's Deutsche Bank, are among those implicated in leaked files.
All over the world, criminals are using the global financial system to launder money. It's a dirty but lucrative business for the banks. If a bank notices a suspicious transfer, it has to report it to the authorities. Thousands of such reports were obtained by BuzzFeed News and then evaluated by the ICIJ. It's an international network of investigative journalists. They have discovered evidence of money laundering worth $2 trillion.
Flooding the streets of Minsk yet again. Anti-government protesters marched through the capital's Central Avenue Sunday, braving the presence of armored vehicles and barbed wire, before rallying in front of the heavily guarded Palace of Independence, a building that hosts the offices of President Alexander Lukashenko. They say they're undeterred by the government's response. More than 100 were detained in Minsk alone on Sunday, adding to a toll of arrests that now numbers in the thousands since the protest movement began in early August. The latest display of force came just a day before opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya arrived in Brussels. She's meeting Monday with European foreign ministers, including EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, aiming to convince them to impose sanctions against officials from the Belarusian government over alleged repression and vote rigging in last month's presidential election.
A tragic morning for Mumbai neighborhoods where a three-story building collapsed earlier today. A three-story residential building in Bhiwandi, which is on the outskirts of Mumbai, collapsed, killing at least 8 people. The incident happened in the wee hours of Monday around 3:40 in the morning. With the help of locals, 25 people were rescued, and among them was a child who was hospitalized immediately. The NDRF team is continuing its rescue and search operations on location, and a further 20 to 25 people were reported to be trapped under rubble. The NDRF teams, armed with specialized equipment and sniffer dogs, are on site trying to rescue more people as of now, and the building with 21 apartments was reportedly 40 years old, and around 20 families were staying inside it.
Was the deadliest conflict in history. More than 70 million people lost their lives. From the ashes of 6 years of violence, a new body was created. Its aim? To promote international harmony and security. It was called, of course, the United Nations. During its 75 years of existence, it's had its fair share of detractors and plaudits, but it's still guided by its founding charter to strive for international peace, human rights, and assisting the most vulnerable.
From a shattered world order to a new era of international fraternity, The concept of the United Nations, developed by Western leaders during World War II, came to fruition at a conference in San Francisco in 1945. Its founding charter outlined lofty ideals of international peace, friendly relations, cooperation in solving global problems, and harmonizing action on common goals.
Members of the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union, NEHAWU, have gathered at the union buildings in Pretoria, vowing not to leave until President Cyril Ramaphosa addresses them. NEHAWU President Mzwandile Makwa-Yiba says they handed over their memorandum to the presidency on the 3rd of September and since then haven't received any reply. The union is protesting against public servants not having received increases this year and lapses in the provision of personal protective equipment for frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We begin tonight with concerns Canada is in the second wave of the pandemic. In Quebec, restrictions are ramping up to fight off a surge of COVID-19. In the last 24 hours, new cases in Quebec topped numbers that haven't been seen since late May. That province recorded 462 new cases of COVID-19. There was one death. The hardest hit areas are in the province's most populated centres, Montreal and Quebec City. Health officials raised the alert level there late today, imposing even tougher restrictions to keep people safe. They include limiting private gatherings from 250 people down to just 25. Political leaders have tried to limit gatherings in Ontario too, but that doesn't seem to be working. Just hours after new restrictions and fines were announced in that province, police had to break up an impromptu party that drew in hundreds.
Despite recording around 90,000 COVID cases daily for the past week, India has decided to reopen its schools, but only for senior students and on a voluntary basis. Schools can reopen next week starting Monday. The government has said COVID precautions need to be in place for schools to open. But many parents aren't convinced the measures will be sufficient to keep their children safe.
Almost 300 whales, some already dead, stuck in a harbour on Tasmania's harsh west coast. From the sky, the scale of the stranding became apparent. Rescue crews are mobilising and planning, but the mission to save the whales will begin properly in the morning. They're stranded in 3 spots near Strawn on Tasmania's west coast. The main pod is on a sandbar about 100 metres off Macquarie Head's boat ramp. A few hundred metres out, there's a second sandbar with more stranded. The third pod is just outside the Heads on Ocean Beach, where rescue efforts will be too late for most. Authorities say they're all pilot whales.
They're very social animals and they are found in large groups, also known as pods. And unfortunately, in this case, we might have had a misadventure, or some individuals may have navigated in the wrong way and now they've become stuck and stranded.
Big blow to Chinese space tracking station in Australia. China is going to lose access to this particular space station in the country of Australia, is what we are breaking at this point in time. And Australia has gone on to respond by saying that China's lease is not going to be renewed after it expires. And Australia has categorically said that they will be focusing on other markets. Once again, a big blow to Chinese aspirations. Australia, which has been extremely vocal about the way China has been behaving in the last few days, has made it sure that they tie up with different countries and powers from around the world.